Perfume has a way of telling on folks. Tonight, when Louis came dragging himself through that front door, loosened tie hanging like a noose, I smelled it clear as day, something sweet and floral riding on top of his cologne. Not mine. Not anything that belonged to this house. That scent was like a stranger stepping in without knocking. 40 years of marriage, and I knew that man's smell the way I knew my own heartbeat. Tonight it told me he hadn't just been with business partners. I sat there at the kitchen table, clock ticking loud on the wall like judgment itself, watching him drop his jacket onto the sofa. He didn't kiss me, didn't even meet my eyes. Just stumbled into bed, snoring like thunder before his head even hit the pillow. I should have felt relief, but instead, that snore sounded like mockery, a lullaby for a fool. I walked quiet, tidying his mess like I had done all my life, when his phone screen lit up. He'd never touched email, always said it was too complicated. But there it was, an unread message glowing like a devil's candle. Against every part of me that still wanted to trust him, I opened it. "You were incredible tonight, Dad, sir." I froze. My blood ran cold, my knees weak. That single word Dad echoed in me like a hammer. Who could be calling him that? And with a heart? This wasn't some innocent child's note. The tone was too grown, too familiar, too intimate. I put that phone down so fast I almost dropped it. But my world had already shifted. When I bent to pick up his clothes for the laundry, I felt something in his pocket. A receipt. San Antonio Steakhouse. Candlelight dinner for two. A bottle of Cabernet he once bought me back when love felt fresh. But tonight he hadn't been in San Antonio with me. He'd told me Dallas. That was no slip of memory. It was a lie. I laughed bitterly, soft enough not to wake him. The kind of laugh you make when you realize you've been living inside a play and didn't even know you weren't the star. Later, in the garage, I found the glove compartment still warm from his ride. That's where my hand brushed something slick, a tube of lubricant. Used. Shameful. We hadn't touched each other in years, so who was he touching now? My heart cracked open, and all I could do was wipe my hands raw on a napkin, as though betrayal might leave a stain on my skin. That night I didn't sleep. The floral napkins I dug up from under his car seat haunted me with their scent, as though another woman had been riding shotgun in my life. By dawn, I had already decided. I needed proof, not guesses. A woman's intuition is strong, but evidence is stronger. So when he shuffled into the kitchen the next morning, hair a mess, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong, I smiled. A thin smile, but enough to keep him blind. He said he'd be home late. I simply nodded, hands steady though inside I was a storm. And once that door closed, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. My old friend Miss Loretta Miller, the one who knew a private investigator who didn't miss a thing. I told her, voice trembling, "I need him. I need to know the truth." Lord, if you're listening, I thought, don't let me lose my mind before I see what's hiding in his. So, before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you honestly enjoy these late-night confessions. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When Miss Loretta Miller handed me the number, her voice carried that quiet kind of knowing only old friends have. "Clara, I don't need details. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." I told her I would, but deep down, I wasn't sure I knew what taking care looked like anymore. For 40 years, my whole life had been taking care of Louis, his meals, his shirts pressed just right, his moods tiptoed around like they were fragile glass. Now, the glass had cracked, and all I could see was the reflection of a man I didn't really know. I called the number, hands trembling. Thomas Green answered with a calm baritone that soothed me just enough to breathe. We agreed to meet at noon in a cafe downtown. That morning crawled like molasses. I tried to busy myself at the bakery, kneading dough, dusting flour across counters that had seen decades of my labor, but my hands weren't steady. Each fold of dough reminded me of folding Louis's receipts, the kind that now told me more truth than his lips ever did. By noon, I was sitting in that cafe corner, clutching a cup of bitter coffee. Thomas walked in, short, stocky, eyes sharp like he could see straight through my soul. I handed him the flash drive with the photos I'd taken, the email, the receipt, the lubricant tube, the perfume, stained napkins, evidence of a life lived in shadows. He didn't flinch, didn't look shocked, just nodded and said, Mrs. Johnson, I'll follow him. Discreetly, you'll have answers soon. When I walked back into the daylight, the sun felt cruel, bright on everyone else's smiles, but harsh against the hollowness inside me. For decades I had trusted Louis, even when he was tired, distant, secretive. Now I was hiring a stranger to tell me what my own husband was doing. That irony burned like hot coals in my chest. That night, as the bakery lights hummed, I got his first report. A photo of Louis entering a restaurant, holding hands with a woman. My stomach turned before my eyes even focused, and when they did, I dropped the phone. Alicia, my daughter-in-law. She wasn't smiling the way she did at family dinners. She wasn't guarded or polite. She was radiant, leaning in close to him, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. My husband looked at her with a tenderness I hadn't seen in decades. Not even when I was that young girl with long hair and hopeful eyes. That look was gone for me, but alive and well for her. I sat in the bakery with the smell of cinnamon rolls baking, a smell that usually meant comfort, warmth, home, but now it felt cruel, mocking, as if even sugar had turned bitter in my mouth. I replayed the photo again and again. Each time it cut deeper, but each time I also felt something strange resolve. Betrayal can shatter you, yes, but it can also sharpen you like a knife. And that night, I began to realize maybe the part of me that had been silent all these years wasn't broken. Maybe it was waking up. Sound off below. Have you ever had family disrespect you like this? I couldn't sleep that night. The bakery was quiet, ovens cooling, dough rising in its slow rhythm, but inside me there was no rest. I sat in the dark with my glasses perched low, replaying the evidence Thomas had sent. Alicia's smile, Louis's hand wrapped around hers. Every frame tore at me. My daughter-in-law, the one I taught to make Sunday flan, the one I defended when neighbors whispered about her sharp tongue, I had embraced her like blood. And here she was, draped across my husband as though she belonged in his story instead of mine. I thought about my son David. He trusted that woman to raise his children, to stand beside him through thick and thin. What would happen to him if he knew the truth? My heart ached heavier for him than for myself. Betrayal doesn't just slice one person, it poisons a whole family. At dawn, I forced myself into routine. Fried eggs, toast, black coffee for Louis. He wandered down with his tie half done, muttering about another meeting. He barely glanced at me. I studied his face lined, weary, almost hollow, and wondered how long he'd been splitting himself between two lives. His lies slipped off his tongue smoother than honey, but bitter as bile once you tasted them. "Be careful," I said, smiling with lips that trembled. He patted my shoulder like I was a piece of old furniture, then left. The door clicked shut, and silence rushed in like a storm surge. I picked up the flash drive, tucked it into a small tin I kept hidden under flour sacks. My hands shook as I labeled a notebook with dates, places, times, evidence. Because when the day came to confront him, or, God forbid, protect David from the truth, I wanted to have every stone laid out. 40 years of loyalty deserved more than whispers and rumors, it deserved proof carved in steel. That afternoon, Thomas called. His voice was calm, professional. "Mrs. Johnson, I have more." I braced myself, clutching the phone until my knuckles ached. Another photo came through. Louis and Alicia seated at a corner table, candles flickering, wine glasses raised in a toast. His gaze on her wasn't casual, it was adoring, a look that once belonged to me. My stomach twisted, but my eyes stayed dry. The tears had dried up, replaced by something else. Resolve. I pulled the curtains closed, sat at the kitchen table with my old quilt over my shoulders, and whispered to myself, "They think they can fool me. They think 40 years makes me blind. But I see. Lord, I see everything now." I didn't know then how far I'd go. But I knew one thing. Silence was no longer an option. It was near midnight when Thomas's next message arrived. My old phone buzzed against the counter, loud enough to startle me while I was folding dish towels. I wiped my palms on the hem of my apron before daring to pick it up, like the phone itself was about to burn me. When I swiped the screen, the video loaded slow grainy at first, then sharper as the picture settled into place. There they were, Louis and Alicia. The restaurant wasn't fancy, not one of those high-end steakhouses with chandeliers dripping down like icicles, but it had the kind of intimacy money can't always buy. A corner booth with low lighting, walls painted a warm gold, candles flickering just enough to make shadows dance against their faces. The background hum of silverware and soft jazz played low, the sound leaking through Thomas's microphone. It wasn't the food that mattered. It was the setting romance tucked into every detail. I watched Alicia lean forward, whispering into Louis's ear. Her lips brushed close, and then came his laugh. That laugh, full-bellied, free, the kind I hadn't heard in decades. He used to laugh like that when we first married, when I burned biscuits in our starter oven and he teased me until I swatted him with a dish towel. He used to laugh like that when our son David was a toddler, running naked through the yard with the sprinkler spraying rainbows across his skin. He used to laugh like that when Maria, our sweet Maria, sang Motown songs off-key just to make him join in. But I couldn't remember the last time he laughed like that with me. I replayed the clip again. His hand reached across the table, resting lightly on Alicia's wrist. She tilted her head, smiling, the kind of smile a woman saves for a man who makes her feel seen. It stung worse than any knife to know that man was my husband, and that smile belonged to my son's wife. I pressed pause, staring at Louis's face frozen mid-smile. My breath hitched, my throat tightening. 40 years of marriage, and I realized in that instant I didn't know the man in front of me anymore. He looked younger, lighter, almost boyish, like betrayal had rewound his clock. I, on the other hand, felt older than my years, every wrinkle etched deeper with disappointment. "Louis," I whispered to the empty kitchen, "you never opened your heart like that after our first baby came. And now you do it for her?" I set the phone down, but the echo of his laugh clung to the walls like mildew. The next morning, I laid out cinnamon rolls in the bakery, the smell of sugar and butter rising like incense. Customers shuffled in, talking about weather and church fundraisers, their voices cheerful. I smiled where I had to, but each grin felt glued to my face. I wanted to scream, "Do you all know? Do you see him slipping away from me? Do you see what he's done with my daughter-in-law?" But betrayal is private, even when it's loud. It wraps itself around your ribs, pressing until you can't breathe, and yet nobody else seems to notice. That night, Thomas sent more photos. This time outside a hotel. The sign gleamed gold against the dark, like a crown sitting crooked above their shame. Alicia leaned into Louis, her hair tumbling down her back, his arms snug around her waist. Their shadows overlapped against the glass doors. Then came the kiss. Quick, almost shy, but unmistakable. I dropped into my chair so fast the wood squealed against the floor. My chest clenched as though someone had pressed a hot iron straight through my ribs. I pressed my hand there, trying to catch my own heartbeat, but it was galloping wild. I closed my eyes and saw Maria, our late daughter. Her face floated before me, sweet smile, hair curling at her shoulders, voice soft as honey. Gone too soon, buried before she could raise babies of her own. She would have been furious to see her father like this. She would have stood beside me, strong and loud, defending the family. I imagined her whispering, "Mama, don't let them break you." And I knew I couldn't. I got up from the chair, pacing the kitchen. The photos burned against my palm. Betrayal wasn't just a sin anymore. It was a storm tearing through my family tree, ripping branches off one by one. David trusted Alicia. He trusted his father. What would it do to him to learn that both had broken their vows in the same breath? I thought of Sunday dinners. David sitting at the head of the table with Alicia pouring sweet tea, her smile polite, her voice soft. Louis at the other end, grumbling about work, acting tired, acting weary. And me, holding the pieces together with cornbread and laughter. All of it had been theater, a stage play where I was cast as the fool. I stopped at the window, staring out at the street lamps, casting long shadows over the neighborhood. A dog barked in the distance, muffled, lonely. My reflection in the glass looked back at me, older, wearier, but with a sharpness in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. I realized something right then. I wasn't powerless. They thought I was blind, thought 40 years of routine had dulled me into silence. But I saw everything now. I pressed my palms against the table, grounding myself. My breath steadied, my back straightened. The ache in my chest hardened into resolve. "They think they can fool me," I whispered. "They think I'm still that quiet wife who folds his shirts and keeps his secrets. But I see. Lord, I see everything now." I'm praying. And in that moment I vowed to myself that I would no longer be the woman who wept into dish towels. I would not let them bury me beneath their lies. I would rise not with fists, but with truth sharp enough to cut through every thread they'd spun. I didn't know then just how far I'd go, but I knew silence was no longer an option. The bakery had always been my refuge, a place where the sweet smell of rising dough could hush even the darkest storm. But in those days, that comfort was gone. I would roll out pie crusts, flour dusting my arms like snow, and instead of peace, I saw shadows. Louis's hand sliding across Alicia's waist, his lips curving into that tender smile I once thought was mine alone. The ovens hummed, steady as a church organ, but inside me I was hollow. Every buzz of my phone felt like thunder splitting the sky. Another message from Thomas. Another photo. Another video. Each one stacked higher than the last, until I was drowning in images I couldn't unsee. Louis laughing with her outside a law office. Alicia brushing his sleeve in broad daylight. Their hands intertwined outside a hotel lobby like they belonged to each other. The weight of those images pressed down on me heavier than any flour sack I had ever carried in this bakery. I used to think 40-pound bags of sugar were hard to lift. No, the hardest thing to carry is betrayal. One afternoon, I set the rolling pin down and stared at my phone, trembling in my flour-streaked hand. Another video had come through. I nearly dropped it on the floor. My breath caught as I pressed play. It was them again, this time on a balcony. Third floor of a hotel, city lights flickering behind them. Alicia's head rested on his shoulder, and Louis's arm wrapped tight around her waist. They swayed like some young couple in love, as though the world beyond that balcony didn't exist. And then it happened like a knife to the gut. He kissed her. Quick, almost tentative, but enough to scorch away the last fragile string of hope still tying me to the man upstairs. I gasped and sat down hard, the chair legs scraping against the tile. My chest heaved, though no tears came. The tears had dried up nights ago, burned clean out of me. What remained was something else. Something harder, sharper. I printed the photos that evening, each one sliding hot from the printer, the ink still wet, the colors garish under the kitchen light. I spread them out across the table, Louis's face tilted toward her, his hand brushing her wrist, her lips curved into a smile that should have been reserved for my son. I picked them up one by one, sliding them into a shoebox I had labeled in thick black marker, proof. That box sat under my bed like a snake coiled in the dark, patient and dangerous, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every night when I knelt to place it there, I could feel its presence humming beneath me like live wire. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman keeping her receipts literally. And yet the strangest thing was how calm I felt while building that archive of betrayal. My hands would tremble when I first opened Thomas's files, but by the time each photo found its way into the box, my heart slowed. Like organizing their lies gave me back control. Like naming each sin robbed it of its power to crush me. Still, the nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed beside Louis's sleeping form, listening to that steady snore that had once comforted me. Now it grated against me like chains dragging across stone. He had no idea that I had already seen it all, that I had cataloged every lie, every hotel, every stolen moment. He thought I was still the same quiet wife who folded his shirts and kept her suspicions locked away. But that woman was gone. One night, he turned over in his sleep, his arm flopping across my side of the bed. Reflex made me freeze. For a split second, I almost let it rest there. But then the image of him kissing Alicia flashed behind my eyelids, and I moved away, leaving his hand grasping at air. He mumbled something, shifted, and settled back into his dreams. Dreams, I imagined, that didn't include me. I sat up in the dark, pulling the quilt around my shoulders, staring at the shadows crawling across the ceiling. My mind was working faster than my pulse. Revenge was still only a whisper then, a seed planted deep, not yet a plan, but it was sprouting. And the terrifying thing was how natural it felt, how right it seemed that a man who had stolen 40 years of my devotion deserved something more than tears. I thought about all the little humiliations over the years, the times he came home smelling of smoke and whiskey but swore it was just the guys. The nights he dismissed my questions with a wave of his hand. The years of indifference, of cold shoulders, of doors never opened for me after the first child came. Every memory stacked inside me like bricks, and I realized I had been building a wall all along, stone by stone, without even knowing it. Now, that wall was finished, and I was standing behind it, not broken but fortified. The bakery became my confessional. I would knead dough as if I were kneading his lies into submission, fold pastry edges like I was sealing secrets, whip egg whites until they stiffened like my resolve. Customers would laugh, chat, and ask after Louis, and I would smile politely while inside I screamed, "If only you knew. If only you could see the box under my bed." One evening after closing, I sat in the bakery surrounded by the hum of cooling ovens. The air was thick with the smell of sugar, but it mocked me now. Sweetness meant nothing when bitterness lived in your bones. I reached for my notebook, flipping through pages of neat handwriting. Dates, times, addresses. Like ledgers for the bakery, only this ledger was of sin. I imagined myself handing it to Louis one day, slamming it down in front of him and saying, "Here, every lie you thought I didn't notice. Every betrayal. Read it, and know I am not blind." For the first time in weeks, I felt a smile tug at my lips. Not a happy smile, not one born of joy, but a dangerous one. A smile that whispered, "You thought you buried me." But darling, I was only planting roots. That night, as I slid into bed, Louis shifted again, muttering in his sleep. His arm twitched toward me, reaching. I rolled away, clutching my pillow tight, heart pounding with a strange mix of grief and anticipation. I stared into the darkness and let the whisper grow louder. The seed of revenge had been planted, and Lord help me, it was starting to bloom. I woke before dawn, the kind of morning where the sky still wore its heavy blue cloak, and the birds hadn't yet found their song. The house was hushed, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that presses on your chest like a weight. My body was tired, bone-deep tired, but my mind refused to rest. It spun and twisted, looping back to the same images over and over. I shuffled into the kitchen, the linoleum cool against my bare feet, and brewed a pot of chicory coffee the way Mama used to when mornings were hard. The steam curled up in delicate ribbons, but I just sat there staring at it, as if the answers I wanted might rise from the cup. The smell should have been comforting, but even coffee couldn't wash away the taste of betrayal. Thomas's last message still burned in my chest. More photos Louis and Alicia slipping out of that law office, smiling like a pair of teenagers who thought they were invincible. Later, the two of them striding through glass doors of a 4-star hotel, city lights gleaming on their faces. And that balcony kiss, the one I had played in my head 1,000 times whether I wanted to or not. My eyes stung just thinking of it, though my tears had dried up weeks ago. I opened my notebook, the little black one I kept hidden behind the flour sacks at the bakery. Inside, every page was filled with my handwriting. Dates, times, addresses, hotel names, phone call logs. The ledger of betrayal. Writing it down steadied me. Like balancing the bakery books, except instead of sugar and yeast, I was recording sins and lies. Each entry carved truth into the page. July 12. Louis and Alicia at law office. 6:42 p.m. Balcony kiss. 9:15 p.m. I wrote slow, careful, like my pen was a chisel etching into stone. If he ever tried to call me crazy, to dismiss me like he had so many times before, I would hand him this book. Here it is, Louis. Black and white. You can't erase ink. That morning, Louis came down the stairs, his tie half done, the faint scent of cologne trailing behind him. But beneath it, there was something else powdery, floral, not mine. I caught it before he even reached for his coffee. The perfume. Her perfume. It was as though she'd brushed her presence onto him like a signature. He sat at the table, hardly touching the eggs I had fried, sipping his coffee like he was the only soul in the world. "Big meeting today," he muttered, eyes fixed on the newspaper instead of me. I nodded, my face a mask of calm, though inside my chest a storm raged. "Be careful," I said, my voice steady. He grunted in response, the way men do when they don't care to listen. When the door shut behind him, I let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands clutched the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. 40 years, and he couldn't see the woman sitting right in front of him. 40 years, and he treated me like a shadow. But Thomas saw me. That afternoon, he sent another update. Alicia again. This time in a beige dress, sunglasses swallowing half her face, walking beside Louis down a city street. Shoulder to shoulder, their steps in rhythm like a couple rehearsing a dance they'd practiced 100 times. The intimacy wasn't just in their touches anymore, it was in the way they moved together, as if their bodies belonged in the same frame. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Instead, I downloaded the photos, printed them, slid them into the shoebox beneath my bed. That box was growing heavy, the cardboard bowing from the weight of all those lies. It was proof, and proof was power. That night I stayed late at the bakery. The ovens whispered low, cooling from the day's heat. The air smelled of vanilla and yeast, usually a comfort to me, but not now. Not when I knew those scents would fade into silence while Louis and Alicia's perfume and cologne mingled together in some hotel room. I pulled down the shades, turned off the front lights, and sat alone at the corner table where I once balanced payroll and holiday orders. The notebook lay open in front of me, the shoebox beside it. I tapped the pen against the page, listening to the hollow echo in the room. My mind spun back through decades, Louis the young man who used to drive me home in his beat-up Chevy, his hand gentle on the wheel, his smile shy but sure. Louis the husband who once brought me daisies after our first fight. Louis the father who taught David how to ride a bike in the empty church parking lot, running behind him with a hand on the seat until the boy pedaled free. Where had that man gone? When had he become the stranger who smelled like another woman's perfume? I pressed my palms to the table and whispered into the stillness, Lord, give me strength, because this ain't just betrayal, this is theater, and I refuse to be the fool in their play. The words hung in the air, heavier than any hymn. I closed the notebook, tucking it back into its hiding place, and rested my hands on the shoebox. My fingers lingered there, tracing the cardboard edges, as though I could feel the pulse of every secret it held. It wasn't just paper, it was ammunition, and soon I'd have to decide how to fire it. For the first time, the idea of revenge didn't scare me. It didn't even shock me. It felt inevitable. The ovens ticked as they cooled, the sound like a clock marking time. And I knew. Silence was no longer survival. Silence was surrender. And I wasn't surrendering anymore. It's a strange thing when grief and fury mix. It don't come out as tears anymore. It settles into your bones like frost, making you walk a little straighter, breathe a little sharper. That's what I felt the night Thomas sent me the balcony video. I sat alone in my bakery's little office, the one with the peeling linoleum and a fan that rattled like a tambourine gone off key. The laptop's glow lit up the room like a spotlight, showing me everything I didn't want to see. Louis's arm around Alicia, her head nestled against him like she'd earned the right. That kiss brief, but powerful enough to burn out the last candle of hope inside me. My chest clenched tight, but my eyes stayed dry. You took vows with me, Louis, I whispered, my voice scratchy, almost unrecognizable in the quiet. You gave me your word before God, and now you give your heart to her? To her? I closed the laptop slow, like laying a coffin lid over something that could still bite. Then I opened the shoebox of proof, spreading it out across the desk. Receipts, photos, napkins, little fragments of a double life. My hand lingered on one picture, Louis smiling at Alicia with a tenderness I hadn't seen since I was 28. That smile used to be mine. Now it was a weapon pointed at me. The ovens behind me ticked as they cooled, each pop of metal sounding like a clock marking time. That's when I realized I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was waiting, and waiting would never be enough. By morning, I was pacing the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, muttering under my breath. If he wants to sneak around with my daughter-in-law, fine, but he gon' learn I ain't no fool. My mind ran wild with every little humiliation I'd swallowed over the years. The way he brushed past me at dinner without a glance. The way he never opened a door for me after David was born, like courtesy expired with childbirth. The way he dismissed David's worries with a grunt, barely father enough to hold a conversation. Those weren't just slights, they were cracks, fault lines leading to the earthquake I was living through now. And then, like a spark on dry kindling, the memory surfaced, that tube in his glove compartment, the lubricant. Shame curled my stomach, but anger pushed through it. He hadn't touched me in years, so who was he buying it for? The answer was sitting in hotel lobbies, clinking glasses of wine with him. I pressed my fingers to my temple, shaking my head. But the thought didn't leave. What if? What if I replaced it? What if the very thing he used to betray me became the trap that caught him? The idea was dark, sharp, and once it took root, it wouldn't let go. I imagined it the surprise on his face when pleasure turned to panic, when their stolen nights became public shame. I imagined firefighters pounding up the stairs, neighbors gathering on porches, the whole street whispering what I already knew. Louis and Alicia, caught in their own sin. The thought made my chest rise and fall fast, like I'd just run a mile. I gripped the counter to steady myself. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice, the kind no court would ever hand me. Still, part of me trembled. Could I really do it? Could I step over that line from silent witness to active hand of reckoning? I poured myself another cup of coffee, sipping it slow, letting the bitter taste settle me. And as I stared out the window at the street lamps flickering against the dawn, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not the kind that comes from loud words or heavy fists, but the quiet power of a woman who knows she's done being dismissed. I whispered into the stillness, "Lord, forgive me if I go too far. But don't let me stay silent any longer." And just like that, the seed of revenge bloomed. Once a thought takes root, it don't leave easy. That morning, as I swept the bakery floor, the idea kept circling me like a blues refrain I couldn't shake. That tube in his glove box. All those lies stacked high like stale bread. I couldn't just keep rolling dough while he was out playing house with my daughter-in-law. No, something in me had shifted. By noon, I hung up my apron and walked down to the hardware store. The summer air was thick and sticky, buzzing with cicadas, and I felt every beat of my heart in my throat. My hands trembled just holding my purse, like I was about to rob a bank. The little bell over the hardware store door jingled cheerful, mocking me with its innocence. The man behind the counter barely glanced up from his newspaper. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" I swallowed hard. "I need the strongest glue you've got. Industrial. Something permanent." He eyed me over the rim of his glasses, then shrugged like it was nothing. He disappeared down an aisle and came back with a small tube. "This'll hold wood, metal, glass, you name it. Careful though, once it sets, it don't let go." His words hit me like scripture. Once it sets, it don't let go. I slipped the tube into my purse as discreetly as contraband. Paid cash. My palms were damp against the bills. When I stepped back outside, the sun hit my face, but instead of warmth, I felt chilled, like I had just made a pact with the devil. Back home, I waited until Louis went upstairs to shower. The pipes groaned, water running steady, covering any noise I might make. My heart hammered as I slipped into the garage, each step deliberate, like I was walking down a church aisle I couldn't turn back from. There it was, the glove compartment. I opened it slow, hinges creaking, and there it lay, the same lubricant, cap crusted, mocking me with its presence. I picked it up, the plastic slick in my hand, and for a moment, shame nearly stopped me cold. This was evidence of everything we'd lost, everything he'd taken from me. But anger steadied my grip. I twisted the cap off. The smell was sharp, chemical, wrong. My stomach turned, but my resolve was iron. I poured the contents down the sink in the corner of the garage, the slick liquid swirling into the drain like poison being exorcised. I rinsed the tube, dried it with a rag, and uncapped the glue. Its acrid scent rose quick, burning my nose. My hands shook, but not from fear this time, it was adrenaline. I squeezed the glue into the tube, thick and stubborn, filling the empty space where his secrets had lived. When it was full, I snapped the cap shut with a sharp click. My chest rose and fell hard, the sound loud in the hush of the garage. I held the tube up to the light, watching it gleam. It looked ordinary, harmless. But I knew better. This wasn't just a tube of glue. This was judgment, bottled and waiting. That night, I cooked his dinner, folded his shirts, nodded through his lies. He told me he'd be late again tomorrow, and I smiled faintly, hiding the storm inside me. Every time he walked out the door, I thought, "Soon, Louis. Soon you'll understand the weight of what you've done." And then it happened. A scream tore through the night. Not the kind of scream from a bad dream, but a raw, panicked wail that rattled the walls. Then came the banging on the floorboards, on the wall, as though the house itself was being beaten from within. I froze in the kitchen, hands braced on the counter. The scream came again, higher, followed by muffled shouting. Then the unmistakable sound of neighbors pouring onto porches, flashlights cutting across the night. Somebody shouted, "Call the fire department!" My knees went weak, but I didn't move. I just stood there, chest heaving, knowing exactly what had happened. My plan, my whispered thought, turned action had worked. Sirens wailed closer, slicing through the night air. Red lights flashed against my curtains, swirling patterns across the walls. Boots pounded the porch next door, radios crackled, neighbors gasped. I didn't step outside. Didn't need to. I could see it all in my mind. Louie and Alicia caught, glued together in their sin. Firefighters sweating as they tried to pry them apart. Neighbors whispering, shame spreading like wildfire faster than the sirens could carry it. I closed my eyes, whispered a prayer. Lord, you saw it all. Let this be my deliverance. When. The screams quieted eventually, drowned out by the metallic clang of equipment, the hum of engines idling on the street. When the trucks finally pulled away, the night settled heavy again, but it wasn't the same. Something irreversible had happened. I leaned against the counter, arms wrapped around myself. For years, Louis had made me feel small, invisible. Tonight, he was the one exposed. For the first time in a long time, I breathed deep and the air tasted like freedom. The night of the sirens, I stood in my kitchen with the lights off, just the glow of the street lamps leaking through the blinds. I didn't need to see with my eyes, I could hear everything. The panicked shouts, the boots pounding upstairs, the scrape of metal tools against bed frame and floor. Voices rose and fell like a storm wind. "Lord have mercy, what happened here?" a neighbor cried from the street. "They stuck together, I swear it. Couldn't pull apart," another voice said, sharp with disbelief. Gasps rippled through the dark. The sound of shame travels fast. It doesn't need daylight. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed tight. My stomach fluttered, part dread, part triumph. I had imagined this moment in whispers, but reality was louder, heavier. Their humiliation wasn't just private, it was public now, carved into the night with flashing red lights. I pictured Alicia's face, her hair tangled, makeup smeared, panic sharp in her eyes. Louis beside her, red-faced, groaning, dignity stripped away by a $4 tube of glue. For years he'd made me feel small, invisible. Tonight he was the spectacle. The firemen shouted instructions, their voices firm, trying to mask the absurdity of what they'd found. Tools clanged, hinges groaned, and still the crowd outside whispered, buzzing like hornets. When the fire truck finally pulled away, its wail fading into the distance, the street settled into a silence that wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence after a church hymn stops mid-note, the air still vibrating with what came before. I stayed in the dark, heart thudding steady, not from fear, from freedom. 2 days passed before Louis crept back into the house. I heard the door ease open, slow as sin, and there he was moving like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. Shoulders slumped, eyes darting, face pale and gray. He shuffled through the kitchen without looking at me, like a shadow in his own home. He couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't ask him a thing, didn't need to. Silence says more than 1,000 questions ever could. That night I brewed myself chamomile tea, the soft smell filling the kitchen. I sat at the same table where I had once wept over his receipts, where I had held evidence like it was poison. But I wasn't crying this time. I was breathing easier than I had in years. Upstairs, Louis shifted restlessly in the bed we had shared for 4 decades. I sipped my tea and smiled faintly to myself. Let him twist. Let him lie awake replaying the shame, the whispers, the red lights flashing in the night. He had built this bed of lies, I had simply glued him to it. The next morning, I stood by the window with my teacup in hand, watching neighbors rake their lawns, wave to each other, swap stories. Heads turned toward my house now and then, eyes curious, pitying, judgmental. Shame is an old language in neighborhoods like mine, spoken without words, just glances, pauses, lowered voices. I didn't flinch. Let them talk. Let them guess. Inside, the clock ticked steady on the wall. The sound no longer mocked me. It marked a new rhythm, one I controlled. Louis shuffled past me on his way to the fridge. His movements were stiff, careful, like he was afraid of breaking in half. He cleared his throat, mumbled something about milk, but I didn't answer. I just stirred honey into my tea, the spoon clinking soft against the porcelain, a sound small but powerful. For once, I wasn't the one silenced. He was. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the shoebox tucked at my feet. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it contained. Proof. Power. Insurance against whatever lies he or Alicia might spin. The house was heavy with quiet. Louis's footsteps moved upstairs, slow, dragging. I thought about all the times I had carried his weight, his moods, his excuses, his absences. Now he was carrying something heavier, shame. And unlike me, he had no practice in surviving it. I lifted my cup to my lips, breathed in the chamomile, and whispered into the empty room. Freedom don't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with silence and a good night's sleep. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to rest. 2 mornings after the sirens, the house felt like a stage after the curtain drops quiet, stale, everything out of place. I stood at the sink soaking a black cast-iron skillet in hot water and lemon, watching grease moons float to the top. It was the kind of small chore that used to calm me. Not today. Upstairs, Louis shuffled like a church deacon with a guilty secret, opening drawers, closing them, breathing heavy. He still couldn't look me in the eye. Didn't matter. I'd already seen all I needed to see. The landline rang blunt, old, and honest. My cell had too many ghosts in it. I answered with the apron still damp against my waist. "Mama?" David's voice. Hoarse. Thin around the edges. For a second I forgot how to breathe. "Baby, you all right?" Silence answered first, then a slow exhale. I just left Alicia at her sister's. She won't look at me, won't talk, said she had an accident and that folks need to mind their business. His throat worked around the word accident like it cut him. Then she said something else. I braced the phone between shoulder and ear and wiped my hands on the dish towel. "Say it plain, David." She said if I ask questions, she's calling the police. Said somebody tampered with private medical supplies. He swallowed. Said she'd tell them you did it. The towel stopped halfway to the rack. The refrigerator motor kicked on with a low hum, a sound that suddenly felt like a warning. I kept my voice level. "And what do you believe?" Another silence, this one shorter but heavier. "I believe my wife has been lying to me for months," he said, voice cracking. "I believe she been working late, plenty of nights she ain't been working. I also believe you ain't never been a vandal in your life, Mama." That should have comforted me, but it didn't, because a threat spoken out loud has a way of turning into footsteps on your porch. "Listen to me," I said. "Whatever happens next, you stand on the side of the truth. Don't protect nobody's lies, not even your own." He sniffed. "I'll come by tonight." "Bring your appetite," I said, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "I'll put on a pot of collards. Small things matter when the big things are falling apart." After we hung up, I leaned both palms on the counter. The kitchen clock ticked, stubborn as faith. From the stairwell, floorboards creaked. Louis's shape appeared in the doorway, bathrobe tied loose, face gray as dryer lint. He opened his mouth, shut it, then found words. "You hear the fire chief wants to talk to us?" "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. He shifted. "They're writing a report. Hazardous materials. Liability. They said there might be a police follow-up." The skillet's water hissed as I set it back on the low flame. His eyes skittered, searching for the man I used to be married to. "Clara, this is serious." "So was our marriage," I said, and would have left it there if he hadn't kept breathing like a man about to lie again. But the knock saved him from his own mouth. 3 hard raps, the kind neighbors use when they mean well but want the tea. I opened the door to find Miss Yvonne from 2 houses down, visor perched like a crown, lips already loaded. "Hey sis, you all right? City done seen all y'all business." She lowered her voice. "And somebody's nephew posted the rescue to Facebook, that clip's flying faster than a choir solo." My stomach dipped. Shame is an old language on porches. But this time, it wasn't speaking to me. "We're fine," I said. "Thanks for checking." She leaned in, whispered, "You didn't hear it from me, but Alicia been telling folks an enemy set her up. Said she gon' make charges stick." Yvonne's eye cut toward Louis hovering behind me like a bad draft. She pinched her lips. God don't like ugly. Then she squeezed my forearm and left me standing in the doorway with the afternoon sun feeling like an interrogation light. The minute I shut the door, my phone buzzed again, this time a text from the bank. Unusual activity alert. My chest tightened. I logged in with hands that suddenly didn't feel like mine. And there it was, a $12,000 transfer from the bakery account to a new payee named J.A. Consulting, another $8,400 the week before. 2 months back, $6,200. All approved by the secondary signatory on file. Louis. Heat rose up my neck like a siren. I scrolled faster, bile burning the back of my throat. He had been bleeding my bakery dry with a steady drip, nothing big enough to set off alarms until the totals stacked like cinder blocks. $35,600 gone in less than a quarter. I clicked details. The payee's address? A UPS drop box cleverly named. The JA? My hands trembled. Louis. Alicia. I laughed. It wasn't pretty. It sounded like something breaking. "You've been borrowing against my bread to butter her life, haven't you?" I asked without looking up. Louis's jaw twitched. He did that thing again, opened his mouth, nothing came out, then a lie tried to be born. It was for a project. An investment. For us. For us? I turned, slow as a Sunday hymn. Then why the initials read like y'all's names braided together? His face collapsed a little. "It's not what you think." You don't know what I think," I said, and walked past him, the smell of his cologne suddenly sour as old milk. I went straight to the bedroom, pulled the shoebox of proof from under the bed, then grabbed my notebook from the nightstand. On a fresh page I wrote, "Bank theft, $35,600. Payee, J.A. Consulting. Fire report pending. Alicia threats." I underlined threats twice. The pen dug into the paper like it was trying to carve the truth in bone. By 5 o'clock, the collards were simmering low with smoked turkey, the fan in the window doing its little drowning hum, and my heart thudding like a slow drum behind it. If peace was coming, it wasn't coming tonight. David arrived looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. He hugged me long, the way little boys do when they fall off their bikes and aren't sure if they're allowed to cry. He sat at the table, ran a hand over his face. "Mama, did you?" He let the question trail off, ashamed to finish it. I set his bowl down. "Eat first, talk after." He took 2 bites, 3 eyes closing at the taste, like he hadn't eaten a real meal in days. Then he put the spoon down, and the grown man came back into his face. "Alicia said you hate her, said you jealous, said you'd do anything to break us up." He swallowed. "But today I pulled our phone records for the last month. Her late nights line up with another number. Same one that calls Dad." He glanced toward the ceiling where Louis creaked, a ghost with a heartbeat. "I think I've been stupid." "Not stupid," I said softly, smoothing the tablecloth. "Just in love." He nodded, eyes bright. "There's more." He slid his phone to me. A screenshot of a hotel receipt. A card on file with J.A. Consulting. I thought it was a client. Now I think it's a cover. I stared at the name, the address, the dates, the evidence stacked higher than my baker's racks. We were past suspicion, past hope. "Baby," I said, "there's a storm coming." As if on cue, the door knocked again, this time 2 quick taps, too slow. Not a neighbor, a rhythm like authority. I met David's eyes and saw the same thought there. He stood when I stood. We walked to the door together. On the porch, a man in a navy windbreaker with a city seal stitched over the pocket, clipboard under his arm, another figure behind him. "Evening," he said, voice neutral. "We're following up on a medical emergency call from 2 nights ago. Need statements from the occupants." His gaze flicked over my shoulder, measuring the house the way trouble does. I smiled the way black women learn to smile when officers bring questions to your doorstep. Calm, polite, steel under velvet. "Of course," I said, "but first I'll be needing to call my attorney." Shocking reveal? David had proof in his phone like a confession. Conflict escalation? The city at my door, clipboard ready, Alicia's threats floating in the air like gnats. Domestic detail? The collards, the fan, the skillet hissing on low. And somewhere ahead of us, a courtroom's fluorescent lights, the click of a judge's pen, the sound of truth being read into the record. I could feel it. Worse was coming. But I wasn't the woman who cried into dish towels anymore. I was the woman who answered the door. The officer's visit didn't last long, but the air they left behind felt heavy enough to crack the plaster. 2 men in uniform asked their questions with clipped tones, scribbling on yellow pads, their pens scratching like tiny knives. And then there was him, Detective Alvarez, plain clothes, steady eyes, the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller. He didn't speak much at first. He just looked at me, really looked, as though weighing how much of me was survivor, how much was suspect. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured. "Mrs. Johnson, you understand your daughter-in-law has suggested someone tampered with private products?" I folded my hands tight in my lap, the bones in my fingers aching. "I understand Alicia will say anything to make herself the victim," I answered. Alvarez nodded once, jotting it down. His face didn't give away what he thought, but his silence said plenty. He slid a card across the table, plain white, black ink, Detective Alvarez, fire divided by arson unit. The word arson caught my eye like a hook. They didn't say sabotage, not yet. But I could hear it circling the edges. Alicia had made her move. She wanted me painted as the villain in this story. After they left, the house seemed to exhale. But it wasn't relief, it was a warning. David sat across from me, his spoon still resting in a half-finished bowl of collards. His eyes were red, his jaw tight. "Mama," he whispered, "she's trying to pin it all on you." "I know, baby." I smoothed the tablecloth with my palm, pressing out invisible wrinkles. That's what liars do when the truth's too heavy. They pass the weight to somebody else. That night, long after David went home, I sat alone with the shoebox on the table. I lifted the lid and spread the evidence like a gambler laying down cards, photos of hotel balconies, receipts with dates circled in red, napkins stained with perfume sealed in little baggies, even screenshots David had pulled from their phone records, late-night calls from Alicia to Louis, the same number again and again. The pile of betrayal had grown into a mountain, and I was the only climber who knew the view from the top. I picked up one photo, Louis' face lit soft by candlelight, Alicia leaning close. My thumb brushed his smile, and I remembered the first time I saw that smile. We were barely 20, and he had driven me to a drive-in movie in his daddy's Chevy. He smiled at me that way when he held my hand across the gear shift. I thought it meant forever. Now it was proof. Proof of lies, proof of theft, proof that forever had an expiration date. I whispered to the empty room, "Lord, if I ever needed you to steady my hand, it's now." The next morning, Thomas called. His voice carried that calm weight, but I heard an edge there too. "Mrs. Johnson, I have more. They're getting reckless." More photos. Louis and Alicia entering a jewelry store downtown, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm like she'd earned that place. In one frame, Louis slipped a velvet box into his pocket. My stomach turned. A necklace, maybe a ring, bought with my bakery's blood money. I pressed the phone against my chest, the photo screen warming my blouse. He was giving her the kind of gifts he'd always told me were a waste of money. Oh. By evening, the neighborhood was alive with whispers. Miss Yvonne knocked on my door again, visor perched like a crown, lips already loaded. She leaned in like we were back in junior high, passing notes. "Sis, I don't mean no harm, but folks are talking. They say the firemen had to pry them apart. They say your Louis was involved with, well, you know who." Her voice dropped lower. "And that you knew." I straightened my back, met her eyes steady. "Let them whisper," I said. "A lie may travel fast, but the truth puts on its shoes and runs longer." She studied me a moment, maybe looking for cracks in my armor, but found none. She gave my arm a squeeze and walked off, her visor bobbing down the sidewalk like a metronome for gossip. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against it, heart pounding. The whispers were circling like vultures, but instead of fear, I felt a strange steadiness. Because I wasn't the one twisting in shame anymore. They were. Louis and Alicia could hide behind closed doors, but their names were already running wild on the wind. That night, I sat in the living room, with only the weak lamp humming beside me. The shoebox sat at my feet, my ledger on my lap. I wasn't just a wife betrayed anymore, I was a woman holding evidence, holding the narrative. For once, I wasn't reacting to their lies. I was shaping the truth. I looked up at the ceiling where Louis paced, his footsteps nervous, uneven. For 40 years, I had lived under the rhythm of his choices, his moods. But tonight, the rhythm was mine. No, I wasn't going to sit and wait for Alicia's lies to bury me. I had lived too long, worked too hard, carried too much. I had the proof. I had a witness. And soon I would have the power. I smoothed my skirt, picked up my pen, and underlined a single word in my notebook until the ink dug into the paper: control. I didn't sleep that night. The house creaked and shifted the way old houses do, but every sound felt sharp, like a warning. I sat on the sofa with my robe pulled tight, shoebox of evidence open at my feet. The photos, receipts, perfume-stained napkins, all of it stared back at me like a jury, and in my hand, Detective Alvarez's card. I thought of calling him right then, laying everything bare, but I knew better. Timing mattered. If I came forward too soon, Louis and Alicia would spin their lies faster than sugar melting in a skillet. I needed to wait until their web tangled them beyond escape. Around 3 a.m., the floorboards upstairs groaned. Louis moving. I listened: close steps to the bathroom, then back to the bedroom. Not once did he check to see if I was awake. Not once did he wonder what I knew. That's how little he thought of me. That arrogance would be his undoing. By morning, I was at the bakery, the oven's already hot. I worked the dough hard, kneading like I was punching my fury into every fold. Customers came in and out, smiling, chatting about the weather. None of them knew that the woman dusted with flour was plotting a reckoning. Mid-afternoon, Thomas called again. His voice was tight. "Mrs. Johnson." I followed them to a bank. They opened a safety deposit box together. My grip on the phone tightened. "Together?" "Yes, ma'am." I got photos. Both their names on the slip. A hot wave ran through me. A married man and his daughter-in-law opening a box of secrets together. My bakery's stolen money, no doubt. Maybe jewelry, too. Whatever it was, they thought it was safe behind that steel door. But I knew nothing in this world stays hidden forever. That night, as I chopped onions for supper, David called again. His voice was ragged. "Mama?" I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She just laughed. Said Dad was more of a man than I'd ever be. The knife slipped, nearly nicking my finger. I steadied myself on the counter. "Baby, don't you take her poison into your spirit. You hear me?" That's not truth. That's cruelty. But after I hung up, I leaned against the kitchen sink, tears finally spilling hot and bitter. This wasn't just betrayal of me, it was destruction of my son's whole world. That was the line. That was the point where my grief hardened into steel. I dried my face, closed the shoebox, and whispered into the quiet, "Louis, Alicia, you think you're untouchable. But you forget who kept the books, who saved the receipts, who knows how to turn evidence into judgment. I may have been silent, but I am not weak, and I am not done." By morning, I'd made up my mind. No more waiting on their lies to collapse under their own weight. I called the number on Detective Alvarez's card and asked for an appointment like I was ordering a sheet cake, calm, precise, all business. He saw me the same afternoon in a windowless room that smelled faintly of old coffee and copier toner. David came too, because I refused to keep him in the dark any longer. A mother can protect and still tell the truth. I set the shoebox on the table like communion. Photos of hotel balconies, receipts, perfume-stained napkins in little plastic baggies. The bank screenshots showing J.A. consulting siphoning my bakery's money into a UPS drop. Dates, times, phone logs, mine and David's. Alvarez didn't interrupt. He just flipped and flipped and flipped again, pen ticking softly against the folder. "Mrs. Johnson," he said finally, eyes lifting to mine, "you understand that if you tampered with any products, that's a separate matter?" I held his gaze. "Detective, the emergency that night is already in your report. Today, I am here about theft, fraud, and conspiracy. My husband and my daughter-in-law have been using me to fund their sin, and now they're threatening to blame me for their mess." My voice did not shake. 40 years of being dismissed had forged a spine you could tune a piano on. David slid his phone forward, screen open to the hotel receipt with J.A. on file. "I pulled this from our joint accounts history," he said, jaw tight. "I thought it was a client. It ain't." Alvarez nodded, then tapped one of the photos Thomas had taken outside the bank. "This is the safety deposit box?" Yes, I said, and slid the affidavit Thomas had drafted time, stamped images, the number of the box, the date they went in. Alvarez whistled under his breath, not from surprise so much as that little sound people make when puzzle pieces click. He stood, gathered everything into the folder and said, "I'll confer with financial crimes. We'll move for a warrant, accounts, the box, the drop address. It'll take some hours, maybe a day. In the meantime, don't confront them. Let's catch them with their hands where they don't belong." On the way home, the sun was gold and low, stretching long shadows across front yards like warning fingers. David drove in silence, knuckles white on the wheel. At a red light, he finally spoke. "Mama, what if they get to the box before the police? Then the Lord will give us a different door to walk through," I said as steady as I could. But I got a feeling the hourglass already turned. Back at the house, I did the one small thing my body knew how to do on hard days. I set a skillet on the stove and fried cornbread in bacon drippings, the kitchen filling with that warm, guilty smell you can feel in your elbows. Domestic work steadies a person when the world is trying to knock them off their feet. I put on an old Mahalia Jackson record low, the needle crackling like rain on a tin roof. Upstairs, Louis paced, the floorboards tattled every step. I pictured him wearing a path between our bed and the closet, trying to figure which lie would hold longest. He came down only once, reached for a glass, then saw me at the stove and froze like a raccoon in a porch light. "Clara, we should talk," he said, finding the courage cowards use when they've lost all the other kinds. "We will," I answered, flipping the cornbread, under oath. He blinked. A heartbeat later, his phone started buzzing on the counter 3 times, then again, then again. Alicia. Her name flashed, then disappeared, then flashed again. He snatched it up and stepped onto the back porch. He thought the screen door would muffle him. Bless his heart, he'd forgotten the way sound carries in an old house. "No, listen to me," his voice hissed, thin with panic. "They came by, the detective. He left a card." On the other end, Alicia's voice came through tinny but sharp. "I told you to get ahead of this. Move the box. Today. I don't care if you limp. I can't just." "You can and you will. You said you loved me. Prove it." She paused, then lowered her tone the way mean folks do when they want to sound reasonable. "And if the old woman goes to the police about the incident, we'll say she's vengeful and unwell. I've already told people she's jealous." I set the spatula down, hands steady. He wasn't worried about my heart or our vows or his son. He was worried about a metal box and a woman who had never loved any of us. The call ended with a muttered curse. Louis came back in, eyes skittering away from mine. "I'm going out," he said. "Errands." "Take your umbrella," I told him, laying a paper towel over the cornbread to wick the grease. "Storm's coming." He didn't catch the meaning, but the kitchen clock did tick, tick, tick like a countdown. When the door shut behind him, I wiped my hands, pulled out my little black notebook, and jotted the time. Then I called Alvarez. "He's on the move," I said. "Headed your way, if I had to guess." "We're already in motion," Alvarez answered, voice clipped. "Sit tight, Mrs. Johnson. Do not go anywhere near that bank." I didn't. I sat at the table with my plate, steam rising off the cornbread, butter sliding down the edges, and I prayed. Not pretty prayers the kind you hear at funerals. No, mine were ground level and honest. "Lord, keep the foolish from prospering and keep my son from breaking." An hour crawled by, then 2. The phone on the wall looked older than ever, a relic from when the only emergencies were burnt pies and missed choir practice. When it finally rang, I jumped hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. "Alvarez." "We executed the warrant," he said. "Box contained cash, jewelry, and this is important, your bakery deposits in envelopes, dates matching your screenshots. Also, a thumb drive labeled J.A. Ledgers. We're cataloging." I pressed my palm over my mouth. The room swam for a second, then cleared. "And Louis?" "Was present," he said carefully. "So was Alicia. She beat him there by 15 minutes. I gripped the edge of the table. "What happens now?" "Tonight? Paperwork. Tomorrow? Interviews. I'll want you and your son to make formal statements about the funds. Separate statements," he added, and I heard the kindness behind the procedure. "Mrs. Johnson, you did the right thing. After we hung up, the house was so quiet I could hear the record needle's slow grind at the center label. I stood, washed my plate, and set it in the rack. Water ran warm over my hands. People think justice feels like fireworks, like a brass band on the 4th. Truth is, sometimes it feels like hot water and a clean dish, like air moving easy through your chest for the first time in a long time. A car door thudded outside. Then footsteps 2 sets came up my walk. I looked through the lace curtain, Louis on the left, face pale and drawn, Alicia on the right, sunglasses on, though the sun had already slipped away. They hadn't come to apologize. You can smell arrogance the way you can smell rain. I opened the door before they could knock. Evening, I said. Behind me, the fan hummed in the window like a tired choir. Alicia lifted her chin. We need to talk. Good, I said, stepping aside just enough to keep the threshold mine. But understand this. Anything you say to me from this moment forward is being recorded and will be shared with Detective Alvarez. I pointed to the little red light blinking on my phone propped against the sugar canister. Her mouth tightened. Louis's shoulders sagged. Clara, he began, reaching for that gentle tone he used to save for anniversaries and doctor's offices. We can fix this as a family. I thought of the box. The stolen envelopes. The necklace nestled on velvet that wasn't meant for me. I thought of David's voice breaking over the phone. Then I smiled a smile that wasn't unkind, just finished. Family is what you broke to buy that velvet, Louis. Alicia scoffed, but behind the glass of her shades I saw something flicker just for a blink. Fear. Not of me. Of the word evidence. I didn't invite them in. We stood in the doorway like people do when they're selling magazine subscriptions, everyone pretending we're talking about something small, while the real thing thrums like a bass line underneath. Tomorrow morning, I said, you will both give statements downtown. Tonight you will not contact my son. You will not step on my porch again. And you will not touch a single dime that does not have your name legally attached to it. If you do, well, you've already met the detective. Oh. Alicia's jaw worked. Louis looked like a balloon losing air. At last they turned, stiff and quiet, and walked back to the car. I watched their taillights fade, red smears in the dark, and felt a shiver, not of fear but of prophecy. Worse was coming. Courtrooms are cold. Judges don't care about collards or wedding photos or the way a laugh used to sound in your kitchen. They care about paper, signatures, numbers, chain of custody. Thank God I had all 3. Tomorrow, we'd start speaking their language. I shut the door, turned off Mahalia, and stood in the stillness a moment longer. Then I went to the sink and rinsed the skillet, careful not to scrape the seasoning, because some things you preserve even after the fire. The knock came just as the streetlights hummed on outside, washing the block in that tired yellow glow. I was sitting with my ledger open, pen hovering over another entry of betrayal dates, deposits, hotel receipts, when 3 short raps echoed on my door. Not neighbors this time. Not charity folks either. I knew it before I even rose. When I pulled open the door, 2 officers stood on my porch, uniforms neat, clipboards tucked close. Behind them, a 3rd figure in plain clothes. Detective Alvarez. His eyes met mine, steady but carrying a weight. Mrs. Johnson, may we come in? I didn't flinch. Of course. We sat at the kitchen table, where so many lies had been told, and Alvarez laid out a folder. Inside were photos from the bank Louis and Alicia caught on security cameras, their hands brushing, envelopes being slid into the safety deposit box. Cash. Jewelry. Even the necklace I once saw in a catalog and mentioned offhand, the very one Louis had promised I'd never need. There it was, gleaming in Alicia's hands. Your evidence matched perfectly with ours, Alvarez said. This isn't just infidelity. It's financial fraud. Potential embezzlement, and given their connection, your husband and your daughter-in-law were looking at conspiracy. I closed my eyes. Not in shock, I had known. But to hear it named out loud, to hear law wrapped around their wickedness, was like someone setting down a heavy load I'd carried alone for too long. Upstairs, the floor creaked, Louis pacing again. My hands trembled, but I steadied them on the table. What happens now? Alvarez's jaw tightened. We'll bring them in for questioning, but if they sense what's coming, they might try to move funds, destroy evidence, even run. We'll need you to keep calm until we act. Keep calm. 2 words I'd lived my whole marriage by. Smile when he came home late. Pretend when he smelled like another woman's perfume. nod when he bled me dry. But this calm felt different. This calm had teeth. When the officers left, silence poured back into the house. I walked slowly upstairs, every step creaking under my weight. Louis sat on the bed, tie loosened, eyes darting like a cornered animal. He tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said. My voice was low, firm. "Not another lie in this house." He swallowed hard. "Clara, please. We can fix. You can fix a leaky roof," I cut in. "You can fix a burnt pie, but you can't fix 40 years of lies with another apology." For a long moment, he just sat there, face pale. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as my husband, not as the man I once loved, but as what he was, a thief, a coward, a stranger wearing my last name. I turned, walked back downstairs, and locked myself in the bakery office. I curled into the old leather chair and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock. Tomorrow, I thought, the mask comes off. Morning broke gray and heavy, clouds dragging across the sky like old curtains. I sat at the bakery table with my collard greens simmering low on the stove because even in the middle of war, a woman still feeds her soul. The phone rang sharp at 9 a.m. It was Detective Alvarez. "They're bringing them in," he said. "Both of them. We have the warrants, the box contents, and the bank records. We'll need you at the station this afternoon for a formal statement." I thanked him, my voice steady, though inside my heart pounded like church drums on Easter Sunday. This was it. The day the storm broke wide open. David arrived around noon, eyes rimmed red but his back straight. "Mama," he whispered. "They came for her. Right at the house. Neighbors watching." She tried to smile like it was a misunderstanding, but the cuffs said otherwise. His voice cracked. "And Dad, they had to pull him out the office." He looked old. Real old. I touched his cheek. "Baby, some men age when their lies finally catch up. Truth is heavier than any hammer." At the station, the officers treated me gentle, respectful. Alvarez slid the evidence across the table like laying down cards in a game already won. The deposits, the hotel records, the receipts, the jewelry, every piece of proof stacked higher than their excuses. Louis sat across the hall in another room. I could see him through the glass, Alicia beside him. Their faces were pale, lips moving fast, trying to match stories that didn't fit anymore. Watching them squirm, I felt no pity. Only release. 40 years of holding my tongue had ended. When my statement was done, Alvarez clasped my hand. "Mrs. Johnson, you've done more than survive this. You've exposed it. You should be proud." That evening, I walked home with David. The house was quiet but not heavy anymore. I poured us sweet tea, set cornbread on the table. For the first time in months, we sat and ate without lies pressing against our shoulders. Later, when I lay in bed, the silence felt like peace. Louis' side of the mattress was empty, but it didn't ache the way I thought it might. It felt like space, room to breathe, room to live, room to finally be free. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Clara, you made it through. You walked through fire and came out with your dignity intact. Now listen, my loves, share this story with one person who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe for more late-night truths with Auntie Clara. Now that the storm has passed, let me slow this down for you. Life has a way of tossing us into the fire, but fire doesn't just burn, it purifies. It burns away the lies, the shame, the fear that's been holding you down, until all that's left is your bare truth. And baby, that truth is stronger than steel." I think back on those nights, when I sat in the kitchen with nothing but the clock ticking and betrayal weighing down on me. I thought I might not survive it. I thought the grief would swallow me whole. But here I am, still standing, still breathing, still telling you this story. That's what resilience looks like, not the absence of pain, but the decision to rise anyway. And you know what I learned? Family may betray you. Love may disappoint you. Folks may take what you've built and try to twist it for their own gain. But dignity, the kind you stitch together through years of sacrifice, nobody can take that from you. Not unless you hand it over. So if you're listening tonight with a heavy heart, feeling like you've been cast aside, hear me. You are stronger than the storm. Your story ain't finished yet. And sometimes, what looks like an ending is just the start of freedom. Now, dim the lights, lay your head down easy, and let this truth settle in your bones. You are worthy of peace, of love, of a tomorrow untouched by today's betrayals. Share this story with one person who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe for more late-night truths with Auntie Clara.